Dr. Jennifer Sandoval, and this is a short video from Soul in Mind on the nature of the ego. It's just an introduction. I'm just going to cover some main features of the ego, and hopefully in a way that you can remember and that can be useful in your day-to-day life. But first, we should ask, why do we care? Like, what is the significance of the ego? And especially in this context, the ego's may be a little bit different than the traditional use of the word ego. But the important part here is that in depth psychology, there's a concept called the psychological difference. The psychological difference is really a foundational topic for how we approach mental health in depth psychology. And the psychological difference is basically the difference between the personal ego or self-concept and the non-ego or genuine self. So the theory is that when we are able to identify with the non-ego aspect of the psyche, we're free psychologically, we're much more liberated, we're happy, we're self-expressed. We don't have as much of the limitations as we have when we come from ego or identify with the ego. So this is a very, very important concept in depth psychology. So I will just jump in and talk to you about basic concepts of the ego. So the ego is formed in infancy. It begins in infancy and it develops all throughout childhood. And it's really a set of defenses that helps a person survive childhood. So it's very much dependent on the experiences one has when they're very young, the family system, all the dynamics that happen in the family. It's related to attachment issues, attachment style. So it's actually ingenious. The child needs to develop a good, strong ego. So we're not saying the ego's bad. We're just saying eventually it is limited, especially as we become adults. But in childhood, we really need it. We need it in young adulthood. So in any case, we need the ego. But the three main ego needs are: the ego needs to feel like it's right. It needs to feel like it has a firm feel or foundation or relation to reality. So it's always checking, is it right? It wants to be right. It wants to avoid being wrong. It feels affirmed when it's told that it's right. And so you can see this, obviously, it's quite a strong ego need for many of us to be right and feel like we know what we're doing. But there's a shadow side to it, which is that the ego delights in making other people wrong. So it's like it will be right, and oftentimes it'll be wrong. I mean, right at the cost of making others wrong. And you've heard the idea too of, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? There's another one, which is, would you rather be right or would you rather have the relationship? So oftentimes we find ourselves, you'll see in relationships, people arguing, about historical facts or who was right, who was wrong. Obviously, the need to be right can create enormous amount of conflict in relationships. So that's the first ego need. It's really trying to be right. The second ego need is the need to look good, to feel good about itself, to think it's a good person, or that it looks good physically. Like, we're all feel pressure to present in a particular way that's acceptable. Obviously, this is really hard for young people too, with all of the demands that are made on them. Physically, to look a certain way, to be a certain weight, to have a certain style, all of that is all about the image of the ego, and it's desperately trying to present a very positive image of itself in the world and also to itself. It wants to feel like it's good. So you can see the problem with this is that in relationships in particular, someone will maybe present themselves in a way that isn't honest so that they look good. They'll even lie to look good to their partner. They'll withhold parts of themselves that are really not okay with them, that have been rejected. This is called suppressing the shadow. We'll talk about that in a different video. But it's important not to underestimate the ego's need to look good. And it will do all kinds of things internally in its own mind to rehabilitate itself so that it looks good again. And one of those things is it'll do self-punishment, it'll feel guilty, shame, attack itself, all in the interest, unconsciously, of trying to be good again. The other thing too is it's constantly comparing itself to other people so that it looks better than them. So the shadow side of this is that it gets a little thrill when it looks better than other people, or if other people look worse than it looks. So again, it's a very compelling ego need to look good. And oftentimes we're run by this need and we don't even know that we're doing it. And then the third, and by no means the final ego need, but it's a big one, is to be in control. The ego needs to feel that it has control, that it has power, and it will either try to dominate the situation or avoid being dominated by someone else. So you can really see this in teenagers, you're not the boss of me, but you can see this too in just, normal relationships where a person may feel dominated by the relationship. Like, oh my gosh, I have to be home at a certain time, or I have to report back where I am or what I've done, that kind of thing. So you can see there's also, tension in relationships where you'll see power struggles. Again, this is the ego's need to dominate or feel like it has power. And the real breakdown there is that where power is the issue, love cannot come through. So we have one or the other. So needless to say, when we're caught up in these ego needs, and usually we're not conscious of them, but we will be controlled by the ego in terms of its actions, its needs, often at a very steep cost to our own self-expression and our genuine self. So we will have another video about what it means to actually identify with the non-ego, and that will be later. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please leave comments below. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to hear about. And until I see you again, thanks and goodbye.